Hello Internet, I'm Daniel, the Pitch Professor, and on today's menu, how not to start a startup. Now, this is a topic that's really close to my heart because I'm not just interested in pitching, but I'm actually a founder myself. And I love working with a lot of startups and a lot of people that are interested in starting a startup. And just recently I hosted a session on this topic, and there's a couple of learnings I'd like to share. The most important learning though is, well, if you're in it because of this, if you're founding a startup because you want to make a lot of money very quickly, super easy, run. Run as quickly as you can because totally not going to work. I know you're going to write, yes, but someone did it and they became stupendously rich overnight. Yes, totally. Happens all the time. Every day, all the time, 24/7. Seriously, never ever happens. Overnight success usually means working your beep 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 off and sticking to it, and eventually things happen. So the worst reason to start a startup is money. Now let's get to a couple observations which might actually help you. So we've already established that money is a really dumb reason to start a startup. But there's something else. This. I think, and what I've learned over several years of startup related topics is, if there's something that's been bugging you for ages, if there's something you're really interested in, or something you really need to solve, you need to change, a really massive problem that you have to just do something about, that's a really cool reason to start a startup. Now what usually happens is, you do this, you find a solution for yourself that works, and other friends, some of your friends notice that you've been doing it and say, hey, that's quite cool, can you actually do this for me? And you're like, well, yeah, sure. And that spreads and more people do, and you really have a clear reason why you're doing it. So have a clear problem, and related to that, a clear reason why are you doing this. This is super important. Number one, why are you doing it? And number two, which is also very important, is try and validate if this problem actually is big enough to make it interesting. Now, big enough to follow it, big enough to somehow live off it, that's quite an important fact as well. Now, the next thing is really important about this whole issue is, and don't get me on the thing I just said before, I know sometimes markets have to come into existence, but still, if you're fixing someone no one cares about, that's maybe an indication that you're onto something that's not so interesting, whereas if you're onto something and a lot of people say, hey, that's so cool, could you help me on this? That's a good sign. The next thing is, talk about your ideas as early as possible with as many people as possible. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, someone's going to steal it and I'm going to lose all my money. But seriously, I think if you tell a complete stranger about what you're doing within, let's say, 30 seconds, a minute or 2 minutes, and this is all they need to be better than you and out-execute you, chances are you were probably not the right person for it anyway. Sounds hard, totally sorry about this, don't want to hurt your feelings, but think about it. If you're good enough, if you've been working on this long enough, it won't matter. And the fun part is, the more people start knowing that you're on it, magic happens, because they'll say, look, hang on, you should talk to this person, they're working on something similar. Or potentially someone else saying, well, do you know what, this and this is bugging me, and they say, hang on, I think I have someone who can help you. Number one, and number two is you'll get feedback. You'll start talking with others, and others will question issues, others will give you interesting insights. It's amazing what happens. So talk about your idea as early as possible. This is the biggest learning I've had over time. The more experienced the founders are, the earlier they talk about what they're actually on about. So problem, super important. Then, really important, don't over-engineer it. Go for it early. Don't just talk about it, but test it with your customers. That's very important. Brings me to the next topic. Team. Now, team is super important. I cannot stress how essential it is to build an amazing team, because of course you can do everything. But let's be honest, can you? Number one. And number two is probably you like to focus on a special topic. And thirdly, it's really cool to work with people who are different than you. Try and find people who are not just different than you, but that can have abilities you would never ever have. Find people who are better than you. You'll see what kind of energy will bounce off that. But be careful with setting up a team, don't go too quickly. Like, have 2 beers and say, hey, you're amazing, want to co-found my company? But understand, founding a company with someone is a bit like marrying. You don't want to overdo it, because usually if you marry someone within a couple of days, chances are you'll get divorced quite quickly once you notice they snore or do weird things. So take your time on that. Another key learning is, well, let's put it short, investors. That's a fun topic. Now, obviously, if you're reading too much on the interweb, you'll read about these crazy valuations and incredible investments that people get. But a learning I've heard over time is try and get as little investment as late as possible. Unless you're in a direct competition with someone else, but that's a different topic. Try and protect your company for as long as possible, because remember, kids, equity does not grow on trees. Yes, equity does not grow on trees. In other words, protect your equity for as long as possible. If you need an investment because you need a comfy office, need a nice shiny new car, that's wrong. Try and get an investment as late as possible, as little as possible, to protect your company. The next topic I find super important to round things off is, if you're going to start a startup, be persistent. Try and be able to persevere, because things will not work on day one. They will not work with version 1.0. If you don't believe me, check out whatever software product you're using right now. Check out what kind of a version number it is. Probably your operating system isn't 1.0, nor is your mobile phone, nor is whatever. Why? Well, things take time, and you launch things and they don't work, and you'll have to re-engineer it, re-engineer it, and re-engineer it. Persevere. Which brings me to the topic. Beautiful example of persevering is, in my opinion, Angry Birds. Now, you know, this kind of like overnight success we had a couple of years ago. Everyone was playing Angry Birds, including Salman Rushdie, and it was kind of sold to us as, well, just a bunch of people wrote an app and became stupendously rich. Nope. Apparently, this game had been the 51st publication of publisher Rovio. In other words, 50 times before they launched a product which wasn't quite as good and didn't quite make it, but still they kept on saying, hey, we can do this better. Hey, let's stick with it. Let's do it. Let's continue. Perseverance is everything. If you Google perseverance and Steve Jobs, you may have heard of that guy, you know, did something with apples or oranges or something like that, you'll find a fantastic quote on this. Now, if you're still listening at this point, you're going to say, well, it's not about easy money. It probably take a lot of work. I'll have to find an amazing team. I shouldn't get an investment because that's bad. So I'll have to bootstrap, as we call it. Now, why would I do that? That sounds like a lot of hard work. And that brings me to the most important topic. Why? Now, this goes full circle, and this goes back to the problem. If you have a why, if you know why you're doing it, if you're intrinsically motivated because it's something you've been thinking about day out, day in, if you go to bed, it's the last thing you think about. If you get up in the morning, there's something you need to do, then you're onto something. If you don't know how to fix it, that's okay. If you don't have the people to build it for you, that's okay. But if you have the will, if you have the energy, if you have the passion and the determination to change something, then is the perfect time to start a startup. Now, understand, on day one, you don't have to know everything. But if you have the hunger, if you have the appetite, if you have the desire and the stamina to build this, to make this happen and to change it, you'll be able to do it. Because there's one really important learning I've had over time. There's only one single person in the world that can really stop you, and that's you. So in that sense, boys and girls, this is how not to start a startup, or how to start a startup. Quite curious to see what your learning is. And obviously there's a lot of things I might have missed out, but this is just something I've learned. This is referring to early stage startups. Curious to get your insight. As always, thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, because obviously this will directly affect your valuation, because you probably have a 5 billion valuation by now if you've liked it every single time. In that sense, I'm Daniel, the Pitch Professor. Thanks a million for listening. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.